And that brings us to the pen tool, which is used to create Bezier curves. It gives you a lot of power. The selection tools in Photoshop are pretty good, but they're not particularly good at making complex shapes. What you can do with the pen tool, it's again with the left mouse button, you click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and you can start to see that I'm building a mask. It's a pretty ugly one, but it's a mask. And as you lay out these points, if you come back to the original point and watch the cursor as I cursor over this, or as I mouse over that first point, you can see that that icon is changing. And what that's telling you is it's going to close the mask. So when I click on this original point where I started, Photoshop knows I'm done and it closes up that path for me. It's pretty handy. Within this same palette, and again, these are going to look different in newer versions of Photoshop, but you'll be able to find them pretty easily. We have the add and subtract point tools, we have the convert points, and we have the direct select tool, which lets us come in and grab a particular point. Now remember, I said a minute ago that the selection tools or marquee tools and the lasso tool in Photoshop are good for what they do, but once you've made the selection, you can't really edit it. You can add and subtract from it, add to it and subtract from it, but you can't really alter its shape to any usable extent. The pen tool and the use of Bezier curves, or paths as Photoshop calls them, gives us that ability. So now I can go in and I can take any one of these and I can grab these control points and I can grab their tangent handles here and I can move them around and I can form fit them to my object. And I'm just doing this really quickly to kind of give you an idea. Now if you go in and pull on one of these handles, you can see what's happening is it's adding tension or subtracting tension from my Bezier spline, which gives you a lot of control. If you had a very complex shape and you needed to rotate this point to fit that shape, then all you have to do is grab one of these little handles and push and pull and twist a little bit, and it will eventually, if you mess with it enough, it will get you the shape that you want. It's a very, very useful tool. And if I have this set up and I just simply hit the delete key, well, all it does is delete a point out of my curve, out of my path, which is not what we want. If we go over here and look, and we'll talk more about these palettes in a minute, but if we look over here, we have a paths palette, and there it is, our working path that we just created. If I click off of it, it goes away. It's still there, but it's just not active. You click back on it, it shows up again. Photoshop allows us to use this as a selection. You can right click on the path and there's a make selection option, which gives you a couple of options. You can, you can feather the selection that you're about to make sure it's anti-aliased, blah blah blah, that kind of thing. But I don't typically use that, since the paths I tend to draw are typically, I take the time to put my points in place so I know I have the shape I want. What you can do is this little icon right here, if you hold down the control key and click it, Photoshop creates the marching ants for you wherever that path is that you laid out. Okay, get rid of that, get rid of this, go back to our layers palette. Let me finish up over here real quick. These are our foreground and background colors. They're fully editable. They can do any color in the spectrum. The default colors are black and white. The little double arrow here just reverses the color, so if you're working within a certain color palettes and doing gradients and that kind of thing and you just need to reverse them quickly, that lets you do that. Now let's jump over here to these palettes. The layers palette is where you will start building the layer stack. As we add more and more elements to this project, we're going to see this stack. I don't know if you noticed in the photo or the image that I had open. I don't know if you noticed, but in the document that I had open just a moment ago, our complete guitar, take a look at the layer stack here. I mean, there are many, many layers and a lot of different things going on here that get us the look we're going for. And this is very, very much simplified in newer versions of Photoshop. You have what they call selection sets or layer sets, where I could go in and say group all of my colored tops, all of my highlighted areas. These are basically highlights for the top of the guitar. I could group those into a single set, and then it would just show up as a single icon in the layer with a twirl down that would give me access to it. But we don't have that luxury now. So the point I'm making here is it takes a lot of layers in Photoshop, and that's really its strength. It gives you the ability to work with transparency and apply layers from, or apply pixels from some layers that are on top of other layers in a lot of creative and varying ways. So let me get out of this, and we're back to our document. Okay, we've kind of talked about paths and we've talked about layers, and we will definitely see more of these two as we move on. The only other one I want to talk about, channels, is not really doing anything for us right now, and probably won't throughout this tutorial, but typically it just shows you your RGB layer. It'll show you your red only, blue and green layers, but we're not really doing anything there. The history palette is important. This is basically an undo stack. If you get to a point in a project where you want to back up to where this, you realize, hey, I wanted to keep that after all, you can back up to that and kind of revert your project in time without having to load the document in its pre-existing state. So it's kind of cool. It's like a multiple undo thing. It's a little easier to decipher than just hitting Control-Z and undoing a bunch of steps, because you can go in here and see the actual steps, and you can click anywhere in this stack and find your progress point that you want to start at. But be really careful, because make sure you're at a point in your project that you want to start working again, because if you back up in this history stack and then go in here and you start tweaking more layers, well, what happens is the first time you make another move over in your document, you start writing new steps below that, so all of the things you undid go away. So you want to be really careful about that and be really sure that you're happy going back to that point. Another good thing we should probably talk about is saving your files. So what I want to do, I'm going to go in here and do a save as, and I'm going to call this, and of course I'm in the wrong folder. Jump over here. I'm going to change this to a Photoshop document, and I'm going to call it our tutorial guitar, and save that. Now as we work, saving in Photoshop is pretty much the same way. It's Windows standard Control-S, or it would be Command-S on the Mac. And as you're working along and you get to a point you're happy with it, just hit your Command-S or Control-S and save it. I mean, Photoshop, like any other application, can become quirky depending on what you're doing, and it can lock up on you, or you could have a power outage or whatever. So just try to get in that habit. Control-S, Control-S, as you're getting to a point that you're happy with it. Or you can do a Control-Shift-S, I believe it is, Control-Shift-S, and it brings up a dialog to do a save as. If you don't want to overwrite the document you've been working on, we could save this as Tutorial Guitar 2 and maintain our original document and continue working on. It gives you an incremental save, basically. Alright, so we'll go back to our history palette. We're going to get rid of all that stuff. Okay, so that pretty much covers what I want to talk about on the interface. We do have on the title bar up here various transformation tools and ways we're going to be working with selections, which all fall under the select drop down, layer functions under the layer, filters, Gaussian blur, probably all we're going to deal with today. There are some other things in here under render and stylize that if you're doing some highly detailed custom finishes on your guitar, you might want to get into. I'll leave it to you to kind of experiment with that. There are hundreds and hundreds of Photoshop tutorials online, a lot of them showing special effects, so dive in and learn what you can from those.